Last week, I built the core systems for my farming game. This week, I wanted to focus on the visual elements of the project. At the end of week 1, I had farming, an inventory, buying and selling, crop growth, and a day-night cycle all working. The problem was, the game still looked pretty rough. My last video covered the first 4 days of the project. This video pretty well picks up from that point. Day 5 and 6 were the weekends, so they were more or less rest days. I had quite the ambitious art list for the week. On day 7, the first thing I tackled was the player animations, which I figured would be the most time-consuming goal. Until now, the player was basically spinning and sliding around the map. Adding proper idle and walking animations instantly made the game feel better. I still have other player animations to create, but I also had a lot more goals for the week. So I implemented player states and got the animation logic working and decided to move on. As you can see, I started putting together some new tiles and rough ideas for rocks and trees. On day 8, I started experimenting with the environment. I wanted the farm to feel less like a grid of tiles and more like an actual landscape. I tried a couple of different ideas for the grass, but settled for this more cartoonish look. I think it matches the character well. Similarly to the crops, the grass is an image drawn over the tiles instead of being an object. Other than being good for performance, I can easily add grass growth and variety because of the logic I already have in place for the crops. In the future, I think I will add some grass cutting and lawnmowers, but it is not a priority right now. On day 9, we took a family trip to the zoo. It was pretty awesome. Later that night, I continued with the tiles. I devised a plan to implement bit masking for the tiles, and spent way too long trying to get it working. If you're unfamiliar with bitmask tile systems, it is an algorithm designed to determine the tile appearance based on its neighboring tiles. Each neighboring tile increases by a power of 2, and then when we add the values of the neighboring tiles together, we have a unique sum of numbers for each possible combination. We can then assign an image for each number. And after fighting with that, trying to get this to work for most of the night, I still didn't have it working. On the morning of day 10, I accepted my defeat and reminded myself that the goal of the week was art and not programming. So I went back to working on the environment and finished up the first tree and rock assets. Then I started to work on the farmhouse. Although the house wasn't quite finished, I still had a considerable list of tasks to complete, and I was approaching the end of the week. So day 11 was probably the biggest day of progress. I added in other placeholder buildings and started laying out the farm. For the first time, it actually started to feel like a game world. I also expanded the crop roster. I added carrots to the game, and the tomatoes got a visual rework. A few other new crops were added. I added corn, potatoes, spring onions, and bell peppers. As you can see here, there are seeds for all the new crops, and logically they have their own properties such as growth time and harvest stage, but I still have to add their growth animation cycles. Additionally, the player can go inside the house, but this is pretty rough right now. I need to spend some time considering the transition and persistence of objects and data. However, this week wasn't about adding huge new mechanics. It was about turning a collection of systems into a believable world and replacing my placeholder art. Looking back at where the project was a week ago, it's pretty exciting to see how quickly things are coming together. I wasn't able to cross off every art task on my list for the week, and bitmasking won the first round of the battle, but the progress I did make has really transformed the project. Next week, I want to focus on expanding the farm, finishing building interiors, and continuing to improve the visual direction of the game, such as the bitmask tiling system and the rest of the crops. Essentially, the game foundation is there, so looking ahead, I can start adding more content in progression systems. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good one.